I used to think I was good at relationships. I knew exactly what people needed from me, and I delivered it flawlessly. Every time, without fail. I thought that was love. I had a system. I remembered everyone's coffee order, their birthday, the name of their childhood dog. I stayed late to help colleagues finish presentations that weren't my responsibility. I called my mother twice a week, even though the conversations left me hollowed out and performing. I was excellent at being what people needed. If you've ever believed you had relationships figured out, only to discover you'd been following the wrong map entirely, subscribe, because this story is about the moment that map became useless. My name is Inara Caldwell, and I built my entire adult life on one principle. If you were useful enough, impressive enough, indispensable enough, people would choose to keep you around. I tracked it like data. How often friends reached out for advice. How many times my boss said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." How quickly my mother's voice warmed when I mentioned an accomplishment. I thought I was being smart, strategic, reading the room and adapting accordingly. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't see, was that I'd turned love into a performance review, and I was terrified of failing. From the outside, my life looked exactly right. I had a good job at a solid company. I had friends who texted me first when they needed something. I had family who loved the version of me I'd carefully constructed for them. I was 32 years old, successful by most measures, and absolutely exhausted in ways I couldn't explain to anyone, because here's what I knew in my bones. Even if I never said it out loud, love was conditional. You earned it through excellence. You maintained it through usefulness. And if you stopped being extraordinary, the people who claimed to love you would start looking elsewhere for someone who could still impress them. I'd seen it happen too many times to believe otherwise. So I kept performing, kept anticipating needs, kept making myself indispensable. And I told myself this was what love looked like in the real world. The kind where someone sees you at your worst and chooses you anyway. That was fiction. That was the story people told themselves to make ordinary relationships feel profound. I believed that completely, until Stellan Thorne refused to let me keep believing it. The system wasn't something I chose consciously. It was installed early, before I had the language to question it. My mother loved me most when I brought home perfect grades and scholarship offers. When neighbors stopped her at the grocery store to ask, "How did you raise such an accomplished daughter?" That's when her face would light up. That's when she'd pull me close, and I'd feel, for a moment, like I was enough. But when I was just ordinary, when I got a B instead of an A, or when I wanted to quit violin because I hated practicing, or when I cried over something she deemed trivial, the warmth disappeared. Her voice would go flat and distant. She'd get busy with other things. The message was clear. Disappointing her meant losing her, so I learned not to disappoint her. In college, I dated a guy named Trevor who loved the version of me that was spontaneous and funny and game for anything. We'd drive to the coast at midnight. I'd make him laugh during his stressful finals weeks. I was the girlfriend who made life feel lighter. Then I hit a wall during my junior year. Classes got harder. My grandfather died. I stopped sleeping well and couldn't shake the weight that had settled over everything. I wasn't entertaining anymore. I was just tired. Trevor lasted 6 weeks before he sat me down with a speech about growing apart and needing different things. What he meant was, you stopped being fun, and I'm not interested in the sad version. He left, and I learned that even romantic love had limits. Specifically, the limit where you stopped delivering the experience someone had signed up for. My best friend from grad school, Morgan, loved our friendship when I was the one giving advice and solving problems. She'd call me in crisis mode, and I'd talk her through breakups, job stress, family tension. I was good at it. I knew how to listen, how to ask the right questions, how to make people feel heard. But when I went through a brutal work crisis, my boss taking credit for my projects, 90-hour weeks, the constant fear of being let go, I needed support. Just once. Just someone to listen without needing me to have solutions. Morgan was suddenly unavailable. Texts went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. When we finally spoke, she was vague and distracted. The friendship required me to be the strong one. When I couldn't fulfill that role, there was no friendship left. I became very, very good at being what people needed. I tracked it, actually. Not in a spreadsheet, but in my head. I'd note when friends stopped texting first, when my boss's praise became less frequent, when my mother's calls got shorter. These were early warning signs, indicators that I needed to step up my usefulness. So I'd double down, remember more details, offer more help, be more available. It worked. People would lean back in, the warmth would return. I'd think, see, I just needed to try harder. I told myself this was relationship intelligence, being attentive, noticing patterns, staying ahead of people's needs so they never had to ask. What I couldn't admit was that I was keeping score. Every request for help was proof they still wanted me around. Every thank you was evidence I still had value. I measured relationship health by how often people needed me, because need felt safer than want. Need was quantifiable. Want could evaporate without warning. The exhaustion crept in slowly. At first it was just physical. Too many late nights, too many favors, too little sleep. But it deepened into something harder to name. An exhaustion that lived in my chest. The weight of never being able to stop performing, because stopping meant risking everything. I couldn't just exist. I had to earn my place, daily. And the loneliest part, I had people around me constantly. I was the friend everyone called, the colleague everyone relied on, the daughter who never forgot to check in, but none of them knew me. They knew the version I'd built for them. Competent, helpful, unshakable. The real me, the one who was tired and uncertain and desperately wanting someone to choose her without the impressive parts. She stayed hidden, because I'd learned over and over that the real me wasn't enough. So I made peace with it, or at least I told myself I had. Unconditional love, the kind where someone could see you at your worst and stay anyway, that was for other people. People who hadn't learned what I'd learned. People who still believed in stories that didn't survive real life. I knew better, and I built my life accordingly. Useful, impressive, indispensable, utterly alone. Stellan Thorne entered my life the way most people did, through work. He'd been hired to lead a struggling division at the company, brought in specifically because he had a reputation for turning around teams that everyone else had written off. He was quiet in a way that commanded attention, not loud or performative, just present. People straightened up when he walked into meetings, not from fear, but from respect. I noticed him the way I noticed everyone, as a data point to file away. New director, black coffee, no sugar, arrived early, stayed late, had a way of asking questions that made people think harder about their answers. What I didn't notice at first was that he was noticing me differently than other people did. The first moment was small enough that I almost missed it. I'd stayed late, again, to help a colleague finish a budget projection that wasn't my responsibility. Marcus had gotten behind and panicked, and I knew how to build the model he needed. It was past 9 when Stellan passed my desk on his way out. Most people would have said, burning the midnight oil, or don't work too hard in that automatic way that doesn't mean anything. Stellan stopped, actually stopped walking. That's the 3rd time this week you've stayed to help someone else finish their work, he said. Not a question, an observation. I gave him my practice smile. Happy to help. We're a team. He looked at me for a moment, with an expression I couldn't quite read. His eyes were thoughtful, steady. Then he said, "Who helps you finish yours?" The question landed somewhere uncomfortable in my chest. "I manage fine," I said. "I'm sure you do." He said it gently, and then he left. But the question stayed. It sat in my mind for days afterward, poking at something I didn't want to examine, because the answer was, no one. I finished my own work, and everyone else's too. That was the point. That was how I stayed valuable. The second moment came 2 weeks later. The senior leadership team was presenting quarterly results, and I'd built most of the financial analysis. During the meeting, my direct supervisor presented the work as collaborative, but didn't mention my name specifically. It happened all the time. I'd learned not to mind. The work mattered more than the credit. After the meeting, Stellan appeared at my desk. "That revenue projection model in slides 12 through 18, he said. "That was your work, wasn't it?" I hesitated. "I contributed." "You built the entire framework." Not a question again, just a statement of fact. I recognized the methodology. It's smart. He didn't make a production of it, didn't march to my supervisor, and demand credit on my behalf. Just acknowledged what he'd seen and moved on. But I felt something shift, a small, strange sensation of being seen, rather than just being useful. The third moment should have made me defensive. We were both in the break room during a rare, quiet moment. I was making tea, and Stellan was reviewing something on his tablet. The kettle was louder than I'd expected. "Sorry," I said automatically. "I know it's loud." I reached past him for a mug. "Sorry, just need to grab." I took the last tea bag from the box and started to apologize again when Stellan looked up. "You apologize a lot for things that aren't problems," he said. My hand stilled on the tea bag. "I don't." "In the last 3 minutes, you've apologized for the kettle being loud, for needing to reach past me for a mug, and for taking the last tea bag." He gestured to the shelf. "There's a full box right there." I felt exposed in a way I couldn't name. I guess I'm just polite? Politeness and reflexive apologizing aren't the same thing. His voice was calm, genuinely curious. The apologizing sounds like you're making yourself smaller so no one has a reason to be annoyed with you. It was too accurate, too close to something I didn't examine. "That's a lot of analysis for tea making," I said lightly, deflecting. Stellan nodded, accepting the boundary, but his eyes held something that unsettled me, not judgment, recognition, like he understood exactly what he was seeing and why it mattered. I should have brushed it off, should have filed it away as him being observant, and moved on, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, because his observations didn't follow the script I knew. Normal people either used my help or praised my competence. They took what I offered, or told me I was doing great. Stellan did neither. He noticed the cost, the effort, the pattern beneath the performance, and somehow that attention didn't feel like criticism. It felt like invitation. Comment below if you've ever had someone notice something about you that you didn't realize you were doing, because what happens next? It changes everything. Over the following months, this pattern continued. Stellan noticed things. He noticed when I agreed to take on an impossible deadline and didn't push back. It was a Friday afternoon when the VP asked if I could have a competitive analysis ready by Monday morning, work that normally took a week. I said yes immediately, already calculating how I'd make it happen. Stellan was in the hallway when I left the VP's office. He fell into step beside me. "You've been here for 6 years, he said quietly, "and you've never once taken your full vacation time." I blinked at him. "How do you—" I asked HR about average utilization rates across departments. He said it matter-of-factly. "You're the only person who consistently forfeits days." Why? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound pathetic. Because taking time off felt dangerous. Because absence created space for people to realize they didn't actually need me. Because staying indispensable required constant presence. "I just don't need much downtime," I said, instead. Stellan looked at me with that expression again, the one that saw straight through to something I didn't want acknowledged. He noticed when I changed my opinions mid-meeting to match what senior leadership wanted to hear. It happened during a strategy session. I'd started to explain my concerns about a proposed market expansion, legitimate concerns backed by data, but when the VP interrupted with enthusiasm about the opportunity, I watched myself pivot, softened my position, reframed my analysis to support what he clearly wanted. In the elevator afterward, Stellan said, "Your first instinct was right. The market data doesn't support that timeline." The VP seemed confident. The VP wants it to work, so he's optimistic about the numbers. Stellan's voice was even, "But you had the actual analysis. You just changed your entire recommendation to match what he wanted to hear." He wasn't wrong, and the fact that he'd noticed, that he'd been paying close enough attention to catch the shift in real time, made something in my chest tighten. He noticed when I abandoned ideas before they were fully formed. During a team meeting, I'd started to suggest a different approach to client retention, but Martin, a senior manager, had interrupted with his own idea before I finished. I'd stopped talking immediately, let his voice take over, and never circled back to complete my thought. Later, Stellan stopped by my desk. "That idea you had in the meeting this morning," he said. "The one you started to say and stopped when Martin interrupted. It was better than what we ended up going with." I felt heat creep up my neck. It wasn't fully developed. It was solid. You just didn't fight for it. Each observation was gentle, factual, never harsh, but they accumulated into something I couldn't ignore. Stellan saw my actual thoughts, my real reactions, the person beneath the performance. And his attention didn't feel like criticism. It felt like he was handing me a mirror and asking me to look at what I'd been doing to myself. But here's what confused me. He never asked for anything. I kept waiting for it. The favor, the task, the reason he was investing this much attention. In my experience, people noticed you because they needed something. They built rapport as setup for an eventual request. Stellan's request never came. He didn't ask me to help with his division's projects, didn't need me to cover for him or make him look good to leadership, didn't want anything except what? Conversation, honesty. It didn't fit any model I understood. And I realized, with growing alarm, that I was looking forward to seeing him, not because he needed me, not because I was performing some valuable function in his life, just because being around him felt different, like I could breathe more deeply, like the constant calculation of what to say and how to be could quiet down for a moment. That terrified me, because if he didn't need my competence, what exactly was holding his interest? And when he inevitably discovered I wasn't actually that interesting without the performance, he'd leave like everyone else had. I could feel myself starting to care about him in a way that felt dangerous, the kind of caring that would hurt when it ended. The shift from colleagues to something undefined happened so gradually that I couldn't identify the exact moment it changed. Stellan started staying late on the nights I stayed late, not hovering, not inserting himself into my work, just present, working in the same space. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd work in comfortable silence. It stopped feeling coincidental. Our conversations deepened. We moved past work topics into actual thoughts. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about his father who'd been a carpenter and taught him that good work didn't require an audience. I told him about the books I read when I couldn't sleep, the ones I never mentioned to anyone because they weren't impressive enough to justify the time spent reading them. It should have been simple, two people getting to know each other. But for me, nothing about connection was simple. I tried to maintain my usual boundaries, tried to be the bright, capable, helpful version of myself that people responded to. But Stellan had this way of asking questions that slipped past my defenses. What would you do if you weren't afraid of disappointing anyone? He asked one evening. We were the last ones in the office. I'd been half joking about how my mother wanted me to go to law school, and I'd chosen business instead, framing it as a rebellious choice when really it had just been a different path to the same goal of making her proud. His question stopped me cold. I'm not afraid. You make every decision through the filter of other people's expectations, Stellan said quietly. I've watched you do it for months, so I'm asking if that filter didn't exist, what would you actually want? I didn't have an answer. The question was too big, too exposing. I'd spent so long optimizing for what others needed that my own wants had atrophied from disuse. I don't know, I admitted. That's honest, at least. He smiled slightly. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because someone needed you to? I couldn't remember. The questions kept coming over the following weeks, each one landing in territory I'd carefully avoided. Who are you when no one's watching? That one hit differently, because the answer was, I didn't know. I was always watching myself, always performing, always calculating how I was being perceived. There was no version of me that existed independent of an audience. Share this with someone who notices the little things, because sometimes the smallest questions carry the heaviest truths. I tried to regain my footing by doing what I knew how to do, be useful. Stellan's division was struggling with a data migration project. I volunteered to help, spent a weekend building a transition framework that would save them weeks of work. I brought it to him on Monday morning, expecting something, gratitude that would create connection, obligation that would balance the scales. He looked at the work and thanked me genuinely. This is excellent, he said. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to help. I appreciate it. He meant it, but he didn't treat it as currency, didn't act like I'd created debt he needed to repay, just accepted the help and moved on. It should have been satisfying. Instead, it left me more unsettled than before, because in every relationship I understood, help created bonds. You did things for people, and they became grateful, obligated, connected to you through the exchange. It was transactional, yes, but at least it was predictable. Stellan wasn't following that pattern. He seemed equally engaged whether I was being helpful or just sitting quietly with my own thoughts, whether I was solving problems or admitting I didn't have answers. The consistency of his attention had nothing to do with what I was providing, and that scared me more than I could articulate, because I was starting to care about him in ways that felt completely unsustainable, real ways, the kind of caring that would hurt when it ended. And I knew it would end. It always did. The closer I felt to him, the more I wanted to run, because this relationship didn't follow the rules I knew. I couldn't measure it, couldn't control it, couldn't predict when I'd stop being enough, and he'd realize he'd wasted his attention on someone ordinary. The fear built until I couldn't breathe around it. So I did what I always did. When something threatened my carefully constructed equilibrium, I started to pull back. I could feel myself falling, and I couldn't let it happen. The caring had become too real, too deep, the kind that would leave marks when it ended. So I activated every defense mechanism I'd ever developed. I stayed busier, volunteered for 3 new projects in 1 week, agreed to lead a cross-functional initiative that would consume my evenings. I made myself scarce in all the ways I knew how, arriving earlier to avoid the morning coffee overlap, leaving through different exits, scheduling meetings during the times Stellan usually stopped by my desk. It was the same strategy I'd always used to manage relationships that felt risky, create distance through usefulness elsewhere, stay valuable but unavailable, maintain the performance but reduce the exposure, make them miss the helpful version before they could discover the real one wasn't worth keeping. It had always worked before, but this time, something was different. Stellan noticed. Of course, he noticed. I saw it in the way his eyes tracked me when I hurried past his office without stopping, in the brief pause before he responded to my increasingly formal emails, in the question he didn't ask when I declined 3 invitations to grab lunch. He was giving me space, but the space felt deliberate, patient, like he was waiting for me to finish running so we could talk about why I'd started. And I couldn't outrun someone who wasn't chasing. The exhaustion hit me all at once on a Thursday night. I was alone in the office at 11 p.m., finishing the 3rd deliverable of the week, and I just stopped, stared at my screen, felt the weight of 32 years of performing press down on my chest until I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't do this anymore, but I also couldn't stop, because stopping meant revealing that beneath the competence and the usefulness and the carefully managed version, there was just me, tired, uncertain, ordinary, the person who needed things instead of providing them, the person who wanted someone to stay without having to earn it every single day. And I knew with absolute certainty that if Stellan saw that person, he'd leave. Everyone did. My mother loved the accomplished daughter, not the struggling one. Trevor loved the fun girlfriend, not the depressed one. Morgan loved the advice giver, not the one who needed support. The pattern was clear, consistent, proven. So why did some part of me, some stupid, hopeful part I thought I'd killed years ago, keep whispering that maybe Stellan was different, that maybe his attention wasn't a prelude to eventual disappointment, that maybe he actually meant what his questions seemed to ask, that maybe he was waiting for me to stop performing precisely because he wanted to know the person underneath? But that was dangerous thinking. That was the kind of hope that would destroy me when reality proved it wrong. So I kept pulling back, kept adding distance, kept myself busy and useful and unavailable, until Stellan stopped waiting and came to find me anyway. He found me in the parking garage on a Tuesday evening. I'd just loaded my laptop bag into the car, already planning tomorrow's avoidance strategy, when I heard footsteps behind me. "You're avoiding me." Stellan's voice was calm, direct, not angry, just stating a fact. I turned. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable in the fluorescent lighting. "I'm not. I've just been busy." "Inara." He said my name like it meant something. "Talk to me." And maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was months of his steady attention finally wearing down my defenses. Maybe it was just that I was so tired of performing and pretending, and running from the one person who'd ever looked at me like I was worth the effort of actually seeing. Whatever the reason, something in me broke. "I can't do this," I said, and my voice came out raw, unsteady, Whatever this is becoming, I can't. Why not? Because I know how it ends. The words started tumbling out faster, like a dam had cracked. You're seeing some version of me that you think is interesting or worth knowing, but it's not sustainable. Eventually you'll see that I'm just ordinary, difficult, that I don't actually have my life together the way it looks from the outside, that I'm exhausting and needy and nowhere near as impressive as you think I am. I couldn't stop now, couldn't pull the confession back, and when that happens, you'll realize I'm not worth the effort and you'll leave. Everyone does. My mother stops calling when I'm not accomplishing enough. Trevor left when I stopped being fun. Morgan disappeared the second I needed her instead of the other way around. The pattern is clear, Stellan. Love is conditional. You earn it by being extraordinary, and you lose it the moment you become ordinary. So I can't. My voice cracked. I can't let myself care about you the way I'm starting to, because when you leave, it's going to hurt worse than anything else ever has. I expected him to argue, to offer empty reassurances about how I was wrong, how he was different, how it wouldn't happen that way. I expected him to be uncomfortable with my honesty, to prove my point by backing away from the messy, real version of me I'd just exposed. Stellan did none of those things. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "What if I already see all of that?" The question stopped my breathing. What if, Stellan continued quietly, stepping closer, I've been watching you exhaust yourself trying to be perfect for months, and I've been waiting for you to let that go? What if the person I'm interested in isn't the impressive version you show everyone? It's the one you're terrified to let me see. You don't know what you're saying. I know that you stay late helping people because you're convinced your value is in what you do for others. His voice was steady, certain. I know you apologize reflexively because somewhere along the way you learned that taking up space was dangerous. I know you're brilliant and insecure and kind and completely exhausted from performing a version of yourself you think I need. He took another step closer. I know you change your opinions mid-sentence when someone with authority pushes back. I know you track how often people ask for your help like it's a measure of whether they still want you around. I know you've never taken a full vacation because absence feels threatening. I know you abandoned that retention strategy idea in the meeting because Martin interrupted, even though your approach was better. Each observation landed like proof of something I couldn't process. I've been watching all of it, Stellan said. Every pattern, every defense mechanism, every way you make yourself smaller to avoid disappointing people, and I'm not going anywhere. You say that now. I say that now, and I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after that. His eyes held mine. I'm not your mother who only loved the accomplished version. I'm not Trevor who left when you stopped being entertaining. I'm not Morgan who disappeared when you needed support. I'm here, and I'm staying. Why? It came out broken, desperate. Because I'm not interested in the performance, Stellan said simply. I'm interested in you. Hit like if this story has you hooked. Because what comes next is the truth that changes everything. I felt something crack open in my chest. A fissure in the foundation I'd built my entire understanding of love on. I don't understand, I whispered. Stellan's expression softened. Every question I've asked you over the past 6 months wasn't a test, Inara. It was an invitation. I was asking you to stop performing because I wanted to know who you actually are. But why would you? Because the performance is exhausting to watch, he said gently. And because the moments when you let it slip, when you're tired or frustrated or honest, those are the moments you're most real. That's when I see you. He moved closer until we were just a few feet apart. When you told me about those books you read at night, the ones you thought weren't impressive enough to mention, I learned more about you in that conversation than in a dozen meetings where you were being brilliant and capable and saying exactly what you thought people needed to hear. My throat felt tight. When you stopped mid-sentence in that strategy meeting because you were afraid your idea wasn't fully formed, I saw someone who cares so much about not disappointing people that she'd rather stay silent than risk being wrong. That told me everything about how you move through the world. That sounds like weakness. It sounds like someone who learned very young that love was something you had to earn, Stellan said quietly, and who's been earning it every day since, even though it's killing you. The tears I'd been holding back pressed against my eyes. I see you, Inara. Not the version you think I need. Not the helpful, competent, impressive version. I see the person who's brilliant and insecure and kind and completely exhausted from trying to be perfect. I see someone who tracks relationship health by how often people ask for help because need feels safer than want. I see someone who makes herself smaller and smaller, hoping that if she takes up less space, people won't have a reason to leave. Each word landed like recognition, like being known in a way I'd never allowed before. "And I'm not leaving," he said. "Not when you're messy, not when you're uncertain, not when you show me the parts of yourself you think are too ordinary to matter. I'm staying because those parts are exactly what I've been waiting to see." I couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was offering. Every observation I made, every question I asked, I wasn't criticizing you. I was showing you that I see past the performance, that I'm paying attention to the real you, not the curated version. I've been waiting for months for you to believe that was safe. "I don't know how," I admitted, voice breaking. "I know." Stellan's voice was infinitely patient. "You've spent your whole life learning that love is conditional, that you have to earn it through excellence and maintain it through usefulness. Unlearning that won't happen overnight." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull back if I needed to. When I didn't, he took my hand. "But I'm not going anywhere while you figure it out. Not when you have bad days, not when you need support instead of giving it, not when you're ordinary or difficult or falling apart. I'm here, and I'm staying." "Why?" I asked again, desperately needing to understand. "Because love, real love, isn't something you earn," Stellan said simply. "It's something you allow. And I'm asking you to let me love the actual you, not the performance you've been giving everyone else." What I learned in the months that followed wasn't comfortable. Letting someone love the real me, the messy, uncertain, imperfect me, meant unlearning decades of survival strategies. It meant disappointing people, sometimes. It meant saying no. It meant believing that someone could see me at my worst and not withdraw affection like a punishment. Stellan stayed through all of it. He stayed when I had a panic attack before a major presentation and couldn't be impressive or capable or any of the things I thought made me valuable. He sat on the bathroom floor with me while I struggled to breathe, didn't try to fix it, just stayed present until the worst of it passed. He stayed when I finally set boundaries with my mother, told her I couldn't call twice a week anymore, that I needed space from conversations that left me feeling hollowed out. The guilt nearly crushed me. But Stellan didn't tell me I was wrong or that I should try harder. He just listened and reminded me that protecting myself wasn't cruelty. He stayed when I was withdrawn and processing something I couldn't articulate yet, when I wasn't pleasant to be around, when I needed silence instead of conversation, when I couldn't give him anything but my raw, unfiltered presence. But more than that, he showed me what love looked like when it wasn't transactional. It looked like coming home to find he'd made dinner on a night when I was too exhausted to function, not because I'd asked, not because I'd earned it, just because he'd noticed I was tired. It looked like him saying, "I'm not trying to fix this, I just want to understand." When I talked through a work problem, listening without needing me to have solutions, respecting that sometimes I needed to process out loud, not receive advice. It looked like patience when I backslid into old patterns, when I apologized reflexively or agreed to things I didn't want to do. He'd notice, gently point it out, and give me space to course correct without shame. It looked like him respecting my boundaries, even when he didn't fully understand them, trusting that I knew what I needed, even when I was still learning to trust it myself. The version of love I'd grown up understanding wasn't love at all. It was transaction, performance for approval, achievement for affection. Real love looked nothing like what I'd been taught. And Stellan, who'd seen the real me beneath the competence and the performance and the carefully constructed walls, had refused to walk away. Not because I'd earned his staying, not because I'd impressed him into commitment, but because love, the real kind, the kind I'd thought was impossible, doesn't require you to be extraordinary. It just requires you to be true. I'd spent 32 years believing I had to earn every relationship through excellence, that the moment I stopped being useful or impressive or perfect, people would leave. I'd been wrong, and the proof was sitting across from me on an ordinary Tuesday evening, reading a book while I worked on my laptop, not needing anything from me except my honest presence. I was learning, slowly, to believe in something I'd thought was fiction, that I was worthy of love not because of what I could do, but because of who I was. The exhaustion I'd carried for years was starting to lift, not all at once, not completely, but enough that I could finally breathe without calculating what I owed, or who I needed to impress, or how much longer I could maintain the performance. Enough to rest. If this story reminded you that you don't have to earn love through performance, that the real you is enough, subscribe. Because these are the truths we forget we need to hear. The love you think is impossible is often the love you've never allowed yourself to receive. Somewhere between performance and authenticity lies the truth that changes everything. You were always worthy of staying for. You just had to let someone stay long enough to prove it.